The campus was alive with the hum of eager students, the mid-afternoon sun casting long shadows over the quad. You could feel the pulse of youthful energy, the kind of energy that promised change, revolution, and the future. Yet among the chatter and the usual college chaos, there was something different in the air that day, something that had everyone whispering in hushed tones and glancing over their shoulders. It started as a rumor, a debate, the kind that would stir the pot and leave a mark on the university for years to come. But this wasn't just any debate. This one had something personal about it. Barron Trump, yes, the same Barron Trump, son of the former president, had signed up to speak at the university's annual forum on political discourse. At first, people laughed it off. Surely it was some kind of mistake, right? The quiet, reserved son of Donald Trump coming to school to debate? That seemed like an odd match. But when the email came through confirming his attendance, there was no mistaking it. At the center of this debate, as was often the case with Barron, lay a storm of questions. Who was he? What did he believe in? Was he following in his father's footsteps, or did he have a mind of his own? In the age of social media and constant scrutiny, people had grown used to seeing Barron in fleeting glimpses, either behind his father at rallies or at the occasional public appearance. But this was different. This was personal. The news spread, like wildfire across the campus, reaching the ears of every student. Social media buzzed with anticipation. But not everyone was excited. Alex Morgan, a confident political science major with a sharp mind and a liberal perspective, was one of the first to dismiss the event as nothing more than a publicity stunt. She had watched Barron grow up in the media's spotlight, never fully, believing in the idea of him as anything other than the product of his father's shadow. To her, this debate was an opportunity to put him in his place, one where she could expose the flaws in his reasoning and bring him face to face with the consequences of his lineage. But as she sat in the crowded auditorium that afternoon, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this would be different. There was something about Barron that made the atmosphere feel charged, something elusive in the way he carried himself. She was ready to tear him apart with logic and reason. But little did she know, Barron was ready for something more, something unexpected. And so, the stage was set for an unforgettable clash. The debate was scheduled for the following Thursday, and by that morning, the tension on campus had reached a fever pitch. Flyers hung from every bulletin board, student. Groups huddled in heated discussions, and social media posts flooded with fiery opinions, both in support and opposition. Alex was no exception. She was fired up, pacing back and forth in her small dorm room, prepping for what she anticipated would be a victory for reason, for progress, for everything she believed in. Her friends, a close-knit group of political activists, gathered around her desk, offering encouragement and tips. There was Mark, her childhood friend who had always shared her passion for social justice, and Jordan, a quietly intense student who always had a knack for reading people. Together, they had rallied behind Alex's cause. This debate would be a chance to make a statement, to challenge Barron Trump and his inherited political ideals head-on. "You've got this, Alex," Mark said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You're one of the best debaters I know. Just tear him apart with the facts. His dad's whole agenda is built on lies. Barron can't possibly be any different." Alex nodded, the confidence growing within her as she adjusted her glasses. She'd spent hours crafting the perfect argument. No one was prepared for the cold logic of her stance. Not Barron, not anyone. This wasn't just another political debate. It was personal. But as she walked into the large auditorium, her thoughts shifted. The hum of the crowd, the whispers of excitement, the glint of cameras, everything felt oddly surreal. And there, at the podium, stood Barron Trump. It was almost strange to see him up there, standing confidently in front of the crowd, his sharp jawline and composed demeanor exuding an air of quiet authority. He wasn't like his father. He wasn't brash, loud, or overtly controversial. Yet there was something unsettling about his calmness, something that made her second-guess her assumptions. As she made her way to the debate stage, Alex caught a glimpse of Barron's eyes, deep, piercing, focused. He locked onto hers for a moment, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. Then it happened. The moment that would change everything. Barron spoke. His voice, though calm and measured, cut through the noise with startling clarity. "We're not here to attack anyone's ideology," he said, his tone deliberate. "We're here to discuss ideas, to bridge the gap between what's being told and what's being experienced. We're here for the truth." Alex's heart raced. This was no ordinary debate, and Barron was no ordinary opponent. A wave of unease swept over her, but there was no turning back. The debate had begun. The debate kicked off with the usual introductions, but from the very first words Barron spoke, it was clear that this wasn't going to be like any other political forum Alex had witnessed. While she had anticipated the typical performance from a member of the Trump family, bold claims and well-polished talking points, Barron was different. His words were thoughtful, tempered with an air of sincerity that made Alex's sharp, prepared critiques feel hollow in comparison. "Before we dive into the policies and their implications," Barron began, leaning slightly forward, his voice steady and measured, "let's recognize that what's at stake here is more than just numbers and statistics. We're talking about real lives, real experiences. And it's not enough to simply shout our opinions. We need to listen, learn, and understand." The audience reacted with a mix of murmurs, some impressed, some skeptical. Alex felt a flicker of unease, but she quickly dismissed it. This was just part of his act, wasn't it? This polished demeanor was just another way to avoid the tough questions. She was ready to dismantle him piece by piece, to show the audience that beneath that composed exterior, Barron was nothing more than an heir to the same divisive politics that had characterized his father's legacy. As the debate progressed, Alex launched into her first argument, speaking passionately about healthcare inequality, climate change, and economic disparity, issues that had become her platform. But Barron's responses threw her off. He didn't argue in the way she expected. Instead of challenging her facts or attacking her points, he began to offer thoughtful counter-arguments, gently pointing out the complexities of the issues, the nuances that often got lost in the partisan back and forth. "I completely understand the urgency around these issues," Barron said, his voice still calm but now tinged with empathy. "But what's important is how we approach the solution. We can't just assume that one-size-fits-all policies will work for every community. People are diverse, and so are their needs." The crowd was starting to warm up to him, nodding in agreement, murmuring in approval. Alex's heart started to race. This wasn't the unprepared, uninformed young man she had expected. He was good, too good. She pressed on, pushing harder, determined to regain control of the conversation. She leaned into her rhetoric, challenging Barron's views on immigration, pushing him on the contradictions in his father's policies. But Barron's demeanor remained unshaken, his responses measured and composed. "You're right to point out the flaws in our system," Barron said, his tone not defensive, but reflective. "But if we're going to fix it, we need to work together. It can't just be about us versus them. We need a holistic approach, not a reactionary one." Alex's words faltered. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She was being outmaneuvered, and she knew it. There was no easy counter to Barron's logic. His calmness wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet confidence that, instead of undermining his stance, made her second-guess her own. For the first time, she found herself fighting not just him, but her own doubts. "Isn't it the easy way out?" she blurted out, trying to regain her footing. Isn't it convenient to sit back and claim we need unity when the very system you stand behind has created so much division? Where was the unity when families were separated at the border? Where was the understanding when communities were struggling to survive? The words hung in the air, and for a moment Barron didn't respond. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Alex waited, her breath caught in her chest. But then Barron spoke, not with a rehearsed line, but with something deeper. "Alex," he said, his voice quieter now, "I understand your anger, I really do. But you can't change the world by constantly fighting it. You can only change it by understanding the people who make it what it is." The crowd was silent. Alex felt her stomach churn. She had no immediate response. His words were like a mirror, reflecting back the insecurities she had buried under layers of righteous anger. She was used to winning, to out-arguing anyone who stood in her way, but Barron had thrown her off balance. And the more she tried to regain control, the more she felt like she was sinking into a pit of uncertainty. Mark and Jordan, sitting in the front row, exchanged looks. Mark's eyebrows were furrowed, while Jordan's face was unreadable. They were her support, her foundation. But even they seemed unsure now. The debate was slipping away from her, and she could feel the audience's shift in energy, turning from an eager tension to something more uncertain. Had she underestimated him? Had she misjudged Barron Trump, thinking him an easy target? The question lingered in Alex's mind, and the growing self-doubt gnawed at her. She was losing. The debate hall was thick with tension now. Alex's mind raced, her confidence shaken by Barron's calm, reasoned responses. She glanced down at her notes, her heart pounding in her chest. The crowd's reaction had shifted, no longer captivated by her passion but intrigued by his composure. Every counter-argument she threw his way seemed to be swallowed up in his quiet, deliberate replies. It was as if she was boxing with an invisible opponent, always a step behind. Then, just as Alex was preparing for her next rebuttal, something unexpected happened. Barron stood up from his seat, not to speak, but to walk over to a large screen behind the stage. The audience murmured in anticipation. He tapped a button, and a series of photos appeared, flashing across the screen, pictures of struggling communities, families separated by poverty, schools in disrepair, young people struggling with the weight of debt. Sometimes the real world doesn't fit neatly into the arguments we make in classrooms, Barron began, his voice now steady and serious as the photos shifted from one to the next. These aren't just statistics. These are people, real lives. And this isn't about trying to score political points. It's about seeing the full picture, something we often miss in our discussions of policy and ideology. Alex's breath caught in her throat as she recognized some of the faces in the images. Children, elderly people, families from underprivileged communities she had spent years researching for her activism. The photos weren't just random snapshots. They were taken from places Alex had worked in, from communities she had fought for. It was as if Barron had been walking in her shoes, seeing the world through her lens. What do you do when you face these people every day? Barron continued, his voice soft but resolute. Do you give them platitudes about political ideologies? Or do you roll up your sleeves and start listening to their stories, to their pain, and to their needs? The words hit Alex like a slap. A ripple of realization passed through her, like a wave crashing against a rock. She had been so focused on the abstract, on the ideological battles, that she had forgotten what was at stake. The real, tangible impact of the policies she fought for, and the real people who suffered from them. She had spent so much time in the classroom, in her bubble of activism, that she had failed to connect on a deeper, more personal level. Barron, for all his privilege, had found the humanity in what she had once reduced to statistics. The audience was silent, waiting for her response. Alex stood frozen, her heart in her throat, the weight of her thoughts pressing on her chest. This wasn't about defeating Barron with facts anymore. It was about something far more complicated, far more human. But before she could gather her thoughts, Barron added one last thing. I don't pretend to have all the answers, Alex. I don't even have all the questions. But I'm willing to ask them. And that's where we have to start if we really want change. We need more than division. We need understanding. The crowd reacted with a quiet murmur of approval, some nodding thoughtfully, others lost in their own contemplation. But it was clear now. Barron had shifted the ground beneath her, and she was no longer sure of her footing. In that moment, something deep inside Alex stirred. She had come to this debate with one goal: to expose Barron, to prove him as just another product of privilege, someone who didn't understand the real struggles of people like her. But Barron had done something unexpected. He had exposed her own blind spots, her own assumptions. Her mind raced, her emotions swirling between frustration and awe. Barron, Trump wasn't just a debate opponent anymore. He was a mirror, showing her the cracks in her own perspective, the spaces where her certainty had turned into arrogance. The stakes were no longer about winning or losing this debate. They were about understanding, about finding the humility to learn from those you least expected. The shift was palpable, a subtle but powerful change in the air, and Alex could feel it deep within her soul. For the first time that afternoon, she didn't know what to do next. The battle was no longer about facts or figures. It had become something much more profound, a challenge to her worldview, a test of her capacity to grow. The silence in the auditorium hung thick as Alex stood frozen, Barron's words reverberating through her mind. She had been so certain of her stance, so convinced that ideology alone could guide the world to a better place. But Barron had forced her to confront something deeper, the uncomfortable reality that she might not have all the answers. Her mind churned, torn between her intellectual convictions and the raw human truth she had just been shown. The moment stretched. The audience seemed to hold their breath, sensing the tension in the air. Alex knew she had to respond. The debate, her career, her pride, it all hinged on this moment. Understanding? Alex finally spoke, her voice not as firm as it once had been. You think understanding is the solution? What do you say to the people who have already been forgotten, the ones who have lived through decades of neglect and broken promises? They don't need more understanding, Barron. They need action. Her words were a challenge, raw and emotional. She stepped forward, a surge of determination rising within her. You want to talk about understanding? Well, I've spent my life fighting for the communities you and your family have overlooked, for the voices you've ignored. You don't get to just step in and claim you understand the depth of their pain. Her breath came fast, her chest tightening. She was losing herself in the heat of the moment, driven by the same anger that had fueled her activism for years. The audience was tense, caught between the two forces battling for dominance. Barron remained calm, but Alex could see the flicker of something in his eyes, genuine empathy. She was pushing him now, trying to break him, trying to expose the flaws in his composed facade. But Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her directly, his gaze steady. I hear you, he said quietly. I hear your anger, but I also hear the voices of those who are fed up with division, fed up with fighting, because that's all they've ever known. We have to find a way to rise above it, to build a future where we can solve these problems together. It's not about one side winning. It's about the people we're meant to help. The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, Alex realized that Barron wasn't trying to diminish her fight. He was inviting her to step beyond it, beyond the partisanship, the anger, the rhetoric. It was a challenge she hadn't anticipated, to find a way to reach across the divide and create real change. In that instant, Alex understood that her fight wasn't just about proving herself right. It was about doing what was right, even if It meant letting go of her own certainty. The debate had become something more profound. It was about connection, about seeing beyond the surface to the people who needed their voices heard. And just like that, Alex knew. She could keep fighting, but she had to change the way she fought. The debate drew to a close, but the room still felt charged with energy. The applause was polite, but the atmosphere was different now. Muted, thoughtful. Alex stood at the podium, her mind racing. She had come here with a singular goal: to expose Barron Trump as a symbol of everything she opposed. But somewhere in the midst of their exchange, something had shifted inside her, something she hadn't anticipated. As the audience filed out, Alex stood quietly, lost in thought. She hadn't won the debate in the way she had expected, nor had she managed to dismantle Barron's arguments as effortlessly as she had hoped. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her activism differently, not as a shield of righteousness, but as a call for change that demanded more than her usual tactics. Mark and Jordan approached her slowly, their faces uncertain. Mark was the first to speak. That was intense, Alex. I could tell you were struggling up there." Alex met his gaze, her heart heavy. "Yeah, I was. But you know what? Barron might have a point. It's not enough to just fight for what's right. We have to find a way to listen to the other side, too." Jordan, usually reserved, nodded slowly. "You didn't lose. You pushed him. And I think it opened a lot of eyes. But maybe it's time to figure out how to move forward, how to make something better from this." The words lingered with Alex. She had spent so much of her life fighting, but Barron had reminded her that true change didn't come from division, it came from collaboration. She didn't have all the answers, and maybe that was okay. She had started this debate believing she was on the side of truth, but now she saw that truth wasn't something to be won. It was something to be built. The next morning, as Alex sat in the quiet of the campus coffee shop, scrolling through social media, she saw something that made her pause. A post from Barron Trump, not about the debate, but about the communities they had discussed. His words were about real actions, programs that focused on bridging gaps, funding grassroots efforts. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the whole solution, but it was something. She smiled, a spark of understanding in her chest. The world wasn't black and white, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to see the gray. The final thought echoed in her mind as she closed her laptop. Change is a conversation, not a battle.